Welcome to A Therapist, a Buddhist, and You, brought to you by the Recovery Collective. If you haven't heard about the Recovery Collective yet, it's an invaluable resource for anyone on a journey toward health and wellness. Whether you're dealing with addiction, seeking support, or looking to deepen your understanding of mental health, be sure to check us out, and more information is in the link. I'm your host and therapist, Luke DuBois. I'm excited to be joined by the incredible co-host, and at least my favorite Buddhist, Salman.
What's up, Luke?
Hey guys. Today we are thrilled to welcome Ann Taliaferro. She is a licensed counselor with lots of letters behind her name, including the CSAT, which stands for Certified Sex and Addiction Therapist. She has dedicated her career to helping those struggling with both substance use and sex addiction. With over a decade of experience in the field, Ann brings a wealth of knowledge and compassion to our conversation. Sex addiction is a topic that is often misunderstood and stigmatized. Yet, it's a significant issue that affects millions of people, warranting attention and appropriate therapeutic interventions. Ann will help us demystify the condition, exploring how it intersects with other forms of addiction, and what we can do to support those affected by it. Whether you're dealing with addiction yourself, supporting someone who is, or simply curious about the intricacies of human behavior, this episode is packed with valuable insights. Now you might be thinking, I don't struggle with addiction, so why should I listen? Well, great question. This episode isn't just for those with a history of addiction. It's about understanding human behavior, resilience, and how interconnected our coping mechanisms can be. You'll gain insights to the complexities of human nature that can help you better understand yourself and others around you. Why is this important? Because we all have habits and behaviors that we turn to in times of stress and emotional pain. Learning about addiction can offer us a mirror to reflect on our own lives and find healthier ways to cope. Ann, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. You were certainly the person that came to my mind when Zell and I were talking about this topic. And so let's kind of get into it. As we mentioned, sex addiction is a topic that is often misunderstood and stigmatized. So if you could start off, can you explain? And scary. And a whole lot of other words. Some people might be fearful. Some people might be intrigued by this conversation. So what is sex addiction? Let's start that way.
Well, in the same way that we look at substance use addiction, and there's the medical terminology, and then there's the personal understanding that any addict really has about their experience. That compulsive behavior that happens to a degree that all other important things cease to exist. So in the world of particularly sex addiction versus sex therapy, there is the sex is healthy and it's good and it's a way that we connect. It's a primal need. It's one of Maslow's hierarchy of
needs. It's
all good. When it becomes maladaptive is when my need for that becomes compulsive and I'm no longer able to function. It's impacting my relationships. It's impacting my work. It's impacting my finances. There's a whole host of ripple effect from what usually, not always, but usually is happening in secret.
Because if the need is maladaptive or bad behaviors, well, I feel the need to hide that.
And with sex addiction, it's really, depending on what it is, it usually developed in secret. It usually developed, we work a lot with betrayal and betrayal trauma. So it is usually an addict coming in after being caught by their partner who's now devastated. Because when it all starts to come out, it generally comes out in these like one incident and then another incident and then finding out about 20 incidents and then all of a sudden the person I thought I knew has been in, there's a guy named Omar Minwala who in the field has done a lot of, he's created his own sort of training and everything else, but he talks about the secret sexual basement and a little cartoon of, the individual, the addict is sort of down there doing their thing and everybody else is upstairs. Just the world looks normal and it looks like, and we never know what's going on in that secret sexual basement. And he takes it as far as, in my mind, this will age me, but in my mind, there used to be a show called Get Smart. And the opening credits had him walking down this long hallway, this very long hallway. And I think of that in terms of the sex addict, where it's this really deep dive. We were talking about deep dives earlier. At the end of that is this secret behavior that usually started before they ever met the person that they end up with.
Yeah, let's relate this to other addictions like substance use. A lot of times we hear people, why am I an addict? How did it get to this level? When it comes to that level of, maybe, would you say, lust and sex addiction, is it progressive, and how, in your eyes, does that happen?
In true sex addiction, it's definitely progressive, and it definitely escalates. And what I've witnessed, what I've experienced, at the beginning of the month, I celebrated 42 years of substance use recovery. I'd say maybe 38 years.
She's BC before crack, but go ahead.
I'm before oxys, I'm before fentanyl, I'm before, which I do keep very upfront in terms of, if I ever relapse, man, there's a laundry list of things that, weren't even invented.
And it's not even the marshmallow vodka that you're talking about.
Nope. So it keeps me in check in terms of, but I'd say probably maybe 35 years, maybe 36 years of sex and love addiction recovery, like really going into that and doing it intuitively, because there wasn't a lot of material that I found or knew of in that realm. I've had a lot of moments in this training where I've gone, man, I wish this information had been out there that long ago, because I would not have felt so alone in what I was experiencing.
So give us, there might be some listeners that are going, holy shit, this is in the basement. This is guilt and shame ridden in ways that maybe substance abuse isn't as hidden as much, even, hypothetically. But what are potential timeline or signs and symptoms of that progression that are generally common with sex addiction?
What I've seen, and I think this is common with substance use as well, is that somewhere early on, I have not yet really heard a story that didn't include some sentence or statement around feeling different, feeling outside of, feeling like I didn't belong, like I didn't fit. There's some sort of either event or just a general, it could be neglect, it could be any number of things that made me feel different. And we are creatures created to connect, to come into community, to be together, to grow together. And that outside feeling, I may have othered myself, but my perception was I didn't fit. And it can be sentences that are simple as, I grew up in a very large family, I was too sensitive. And I was a very intuitive, sensitive child. Children are just little intuitors. They don't have words for all the feelings. But I'm the seventh of 8 children. I grew up in a crowd of people, and it was noisy and boisterous and wonderful in a lot of ways, and completely overstimulating to my system. And somewhere in there, I picked up this message that I was a problem. And I didn't feel like I fit into the general whatever.
Yeah, not just different, but don't fit.
Yeah. That isolation, for me, and in the story that I sort of go into with my clients, turns into, that's a really powerless feeling. And when you're out there engaging in the world and navigating, if you find any sort of information that fits that narrative, that confirmation bias, it just builds on it. And you feel even more powerless as you go along. And then there can be, catalyst events. There can be bullying. There can be, abuse of any sort.
So when it comes to sex addiction, I often say how I think affects how I feel, which affects how I act. So what does that look like in the early stages to progressing with sex addiction?
Well, I think it feels like, there is a tension. There's a tension in that. Our systems are always looking for a release of tension. It's looking for homeostasis. I want to feel stable. For me, it was finding my father's Playboys in the hall closet. Why they were left in the hall closet.
Just about, that's
really easy to find.
About every 7-8-year-old boy that's 35 and older.
But I'm a girl finding
the
Playboys. And so this is informing who I am as a woman at 9 or 10.
Yeah.
And what I'm supposed to look like and how I'm supposed to be. I don't necessarily feel that way. So now I'm feeling even more different.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at my peers as I'm coming into my teenage years. It is really confusing.
It brings bodily feelings. It brings,
There's arousal. There's arousal in these images. They're really strong images. Now, if you fast forward to now, it's porn. And it's intentional. And it's really designed to be very powerful. And that arousal, and that's a great big huge dopamine hit. And that release, so what has my brain learned? It has learned that this thing relieves this thing.
So that's the beginning with masturbation, right? And then that release and, a lot of the clients that are in recovery or seeking recovery, their often first addiction is masturbation.
Yeah.
Because it's what you're explaining, that arousal release.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Ann, for joining us. I'm just listening a lot, and this is a very important topic and also difficult topic for many people. But my experience is like compared to Western culture and Eastern culture. In Western culture, sex is more embraced in comparison to Eastern culture is suppressed. But
very true.
Yeah, but I have a lot of questions, and I don't want to jump ahead. But my initial thoughts are pretty much that when somebody is born, like comparing substance abuse and this kind of process addiction, that when somebody's born, that person is not born with a bottle out of the womb. But for this, somebody's born with some kind of sexuality. It's part of our being. We're sexual beings. And that's how we exist. That's how we're procreated. So it's not something that we can work against. It's not something to be eliminated out of it. Because I also heard some stories where sex addiction being followed by sexual anorexia, that you act out so much that you end up acting in.
Yes.
And there's that idea of shame cycle, that you do it. There's a ritual. There's a remorse. And then keep repeating it, spiraling down. And there are also extreme forms of this type of addiction, which I shouldn't even mention in this podcast, of like prostitutions, child pornography, like human traffic, things like that. Like things can
it's
be
all in there.
Yeah.
It's a big soup of stuff.
Yeah. But I think it is also very important, but maybe we can dive into it down the line. But what I wanted to learn from this conversation and then wanted to be available to listeners is like, how is that therapy process like? Because, it's not about, I'm going to eliminate sex out of my life and my life will be completely fine, because that's the case for substance abuse. There's no such thing as I'm going to have a healthy relationship with alcohol and then my life will be great, So like...
Well, it's like food addiction. You need to eat.
Yeah.
So it's not that... I really like Drew Pinsky, who years ago, I heard him make the statement that it isn't the alcohol, it isn't the drugs, it isn't the sex, it's not the food, it's not the gambling. It's my relationship to it. So my relationship to sex was, there wasn't anybody around me. There were lots of people around me, but there wasn't anybody around me really telling me that like masturbation is okay. It's natural. It's normal. And of course you feel good. And, here are the ways to kind of do that in a healthy way. Here's the way to be healthy. I had if somebody finds out that you're doing this, or you overhear people talking about doing this, you hear about it in a really shame-based way. So you start to feel like I'm doing something wrong. But I would also say that, because this has been one of those things, even from the time that you and I worked together, Luke, I would ask my clients when they came in the course of that intake, well, like, tell me how much secret keeping and lying and sort of risking things and getting away with it plays into you getting high. And again, I haven't heard anybody ever say, oh, it doesn't at all. Everybody goes, oh yeah, it really ups it. My my doing these things in secret created a little bit more of that arousal, the idea of getting caught, the idea of, and in my addiction, that was very much a piece of the idea of getting caught in this compromising position added an extra something to the whole thing. So to your question, coming into recovery and sort of putting down that compulsive use of was sort of like, well, what do I do now? What is healthy? What does healthy look like? Because now it's not a secret. Now it's like, there's no, it's okay. You can do what you want to do kind of thing. Well, now it's sort of taken a big, like, well, now it doesn't seem all that interesting.
Yeah. The high of secrecy is gone. Yeah.
And they asked us in one of my training modules, one of the questions that we had to before our break, they said, I want you to write down an answer to the question of what is sex for? What is the purpose of? And it seems like a really simple question until you start to ask yourself, like, what is the meaning of this for me? And when we came back out of I think my cohort was like 68 people, everybody had a different answer.
It's kind of like spirituality. It's like there's 1,000 different definitions for spirituality.
Yeah. And what's the meaning to me versus what's the meaning to you? Yeah. If I meet somebody and we have the same sort of sexual energy and having sex every day is a thing that, like, that's great. That's fantastic. But if I'm with somebody who I want to have sex every day and their sex drive is once a week and we never talk about it, what starts happening?
The intimacy starts to be affected. What I mean by that is there's sexual intimacy, communication intimacy, emotional intimacy, physical intimacy. And when we don't have those conversations, the sexual intimacy is drastically affected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And somebody's going, I always feel like I'm initiating sex and you don't want it. And then I feel rejected and then I'm turning away from. Mm-hmm. And we're still not talking about it. We're still not talking about why. If this person over here, sex drive is impacted because they're spending their mornings and evenings masturbating to pornography, the real-time interaction is so much harder. When you're a kid and you stumble upon porn and that's what teaches you what sex is, and then you meet someone and you interact with them and you are attracted to them and you want to have sex with them, none of what you experience in real time looks like what you were watching on screen.
Is porn ever healthy?
I think it can be.
Okay.
I think in some formats it can be. And I've had those conversations with people that I work with. But again, I think it's the communication. And again, if I have a partner who's like, yeah, porn doesn't bother me. I don't care if you watch porn. In fact, that can be part of what we do together. That can be part of what gets us going. Can
bring intimacy together.
It can.
Sex together, yeah.
But what's missing in a lot of what happens in the maladaptive and the addiction realm is we're not good communicators.
So when it comes to porn, how does that lead to maladaptive or sex addiction for a lot of people?
Well, what people usually start with is pretty, what they would term in the sex addiction world, vanilla, or even in the sex therapy world, vanilla. It's pretty, man, woman.
Mild.
Yeah. And that will do, it's kind of like the first time I got high, felt like a really big feeling. And it feels really big initially. That dopamine hit, that level, is going to top out. And then what happens? The same thing with drugs. I need more in order to get a bigger feeling. So my arousal is going to top out. And then I'm going to need something that's more powerful. And that may be something very, very different. Now, I do have some clients who at a very young age stumbled upon things like sissy hypnopornography, which is a whole other. This is something new to me.
Google it.
But don't look at it. That was my client. Don't look at it. Investigate it, but don't look at it. It's very, very powerful. It is very, like, takes brainwashing techniques. And at 8 or 9 years old, to have something like that hit your brain.
It's not meant for it.
Oh, no, not at all. And there's very little research about it. What I found the other day was some numbers on how there were maybe 300,000 followers of this before the pandemic, and that sort of doubled post-pandemic. And that is, somebody we're now all isolated. And this is where that sort of isolation came up for me, because there were a lot of people who just lost it in that isolation. And a lot of these behaviors got really escalated and really out of hand.
And it's a quick release.
A quick release.
Yeah. And
so in the same way that the tension builds and I go out and I get drunk or I get high, I go out and I either watch porn and masturbate, or I find a sex worker, or I even just webcamming and OnlyFans, and now I'm not just in a realm of sexual behaviors. I am spending money. I'm taking from the family finances, because there's a big price that you got to pay for that. It's all very transactional.
Yeah, and the porn or the webcamming goes back to your awareness that you brought up when it comes to communication, whether it's communicating with a spouse or communicating really with ourselves, with what we're doing and why we're doing it. With drugs and alcohol, there's a relationship, often a toxic relationship with substances. Do you look at sex maladaptive behaviors as its own toxic relationship? What's your parallel?
Yes. And again, in the same way, it's not the thing, it's my relationship to the thing.
Okay.
And what is the purpose that I'm using it for? When you have someone finally get to that point where they go, oh, I'm using this person to fill a void, and they can't fill that void. My partner can't even fill that void.
Hey listeners, we've got something extraordinary to share, a chance to reshape your journey no matter where you are. You're familiar with Zalmal's insights on our podcast, but there's more. Through the Recovery Collective, he offers life, mindfulness, recovery coaching, and meditation groups guiding you toward a fulfilled and mindful existence, no matter your location. Zal's journey from a Burmese Buddhist novice to a skilled practitioner equips him with timeless wisdom and contemporary strategies. Whether you're navigating life's shifts, seeking clarity, or pursuing self-awareness, Zal's coaching serves as a compass guiding you toward success. The best part? Zal's approach centers on your growth and empowerment. He equips you with tools to tap into your inner strengths for continuous evolution no matter where you are. Ready to take that next step in your personal growth journey? Connect with Zalmal and the Recovery Collective at 240-813-8135 from anywhere in the world. Investigating in your journey reaps immeasurable rewards. Let Zalmal guide you toward resilience, clarity, and empowerment no matter where life finds you. Now, let's transition back into our conversation. Stay tuned, stay curious, and keep your journey growing. And for a lot of your clients, it takes a spouse to find out what are some of the other negative things that bring people to sex therapy?
The police. A little at the door.
Oh, yeah.
Which has been really, really fascinating. When halfway through my sort of expansion of addiction therapy, my boss said, I have somebody who, is in the court system, and, how do you feel about working with an offender? And I was like, I got some feelings.
Yep.
My nature is more curious than judgmental. So, there is that initial that's usually only in one realm. And that's really very stigmatized and very controversial and should be, rightly so. But again, why?
There's a rhyme or reason why we do the things we do.
What drove somebody to that? I'm always curious about that. Why do I do the things that I do? Why do you do the things that you do? What shaped you and brought you to that place? And that's where, for me, most of what I did in my master's program was trauma and neurobiology, and just sort of my own nerdy, obsessed desire to understand the
root
why,
cause, so the brain,
roots.
the brain root, yeah.
And there's a lot of trauma behind what drives somebody to, like, watching child pornography. There is also an element of, I would throw this in there, there's an element of, and you're the generation of kids and kids behind you, like, coming into video games. And video games being a big thing. And you're sitting alone in your room with your little video games. Well, there's a whole backdoor channel in that video game world, in that virtual world, that leads right into chat rooms, that lead people right into conversations with people who really want to pull you in to this whole world, into the webcamming world, into the looking at things, and that I have heard that story more than a number of times. That there was no intentional, I'm going and looking for this thing. There was I'm over here, and then, like those little YouTube, little story things that are running along the side, like, oh, that's interesting too. Let me go to there, and let me go to there. And now there's an algorithm that is taking me down a very nefarious path.
It's like, I didn't think I was in those people, places, and things, but there was some of that going on.
Yeah.
So Luke brought that up about intimacy. I think it's important. I guess it's difficult, or it's impossible to talk about sex addiction without intimacy. It goes back to what you were saying earlier about, I guess it's common in addiction, like feeling different, but also like intimacy cannot occur without vulnerability. So like there's also an aspect, especially with the sex addiction, there's an aspect of not trusting,
Yes.
So it's in secrecy because I don't trust, I do this in my way because I don't trust. And so like helping someone to do that, to be able to start trusting, is probably very, very difficult, but also that's probably the only solution to start having a healthy, open relationship. I guess there's also an aspect of self-compassion too, right? Like to be self-acceptance of some kind.
Self-honesty that can get you to self-acceptance, that can get you to self-compassion. That's a really good point. And I would say, and I should say, because I just recently sort of looked at my caseload and went, I have more men on my caseload than I have women. So a shout out to the men. And I have said that to a lot of my clients, a shout out to the men, because we've also had this belief that men don't go and get help. More women go get help. More women are diagnosed with more. And I hate that. And it's not particularly true.
And it's not just the men that are getting that knock from 911 either.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And there are women. I mean, we all sort of in my practice, in the practice that I'm in, have different sort of our specialties. And one of my coworkers really sort of deals with women, sex and love addiction. Not that I don't have some of those clients as well. So it's not indicative of one or the other. But when you talk about vulnerability, I do see that, like, the biggest obstacle for men is to get out from behind a very deep-seated belief that if I show you who I really am, if I come in as me right off the bat, you are going to reject me. And so I can't really tell you these things, because it is a conversation that I have with my clients. If they're not in a relationship and they're going to embark on dating, it's like, So when are we going to tell that person that we have this struggle and we seek help for this and we're doing this thing? Because that's a really important piece of information for the person that you're interested in. And on the other side of that, I can tell you every partner, every woman in particular, but I think men probably would feel the same way too, will say, I can forgive the behavior. That's a big statement.
Huge.
I can forgive the behavior. It's the lies and the deception. Like they knew before they dated me, married me, had kids with me, that they had this problem. And they never told me. Or I said when we were dating, my last boyfriend was a sex addict. I don't want that. And they never admitted that they were too, or that they had an issue or a problem. And now they're on the back end of, I trusted you that what you told me was true because you weren't vulnerable enough to tell me who you really were.
For someone with that fear of guilt and shame that's preventing them from being proactive in their recovery process, what would you tell them? Because that's one reason. Another reason might be, they might fear about being able to perform or ejaculate if they weren't doing these intense actions. So,
well, I think the biggest piece in not getting honest with your partner about that stuff, what people don't realize is you take away the opportunity for your partner to support you.
Connection.
Yeah.
Vulnerability.
And it's so much harder to try to get that connection back than to go in and be vulnerable. There is a risk. There is a risk that your partner might go, nope.
Sure. That fear can prevent you from taking the action.
But my take is, if I'm dating, when I'm dating, I want to know that early on. Yeah. I want to know that in the beginning when it, like, yeah, ouch, it's going to hurt. I put a lot of possibility in that early, that limerence stage. Right? I am really fascinated with this idea. This came out of like listening to all these stories and going, I wonder why when we first meet someone, we give them 100% of our trust and we believe everything that they tell us when we know the least that we're ever going to know about them. Ever. We go, here, I believe you and everything you're saying. I have no idea who you are. But the picture that you're painting for me is so beautiful. I'm getting really emotionally invested. You're telling me you want kids and you want family and this is what our life is going to look like. And none of that looks like what's going on present day. But let's skip that. Let's just look ahead. And then 20 years down the road, it's like, this person is not even anything close to what I imagined that they would be. This is not the life that I signed up for. And we've seen that in substance use as well. I used to teach family education, and I used to go, you're feeling a little blindsided that your person is in treatment and you had no idea what was going on and what they were doing. And this is what it's going to look like. The addict in treatment usually spends that time doing, if they're doing the work, they're paying attention and doing a lot of really hard work. And they're feeling so good about themselves when they're leaving that they're like, man, I'm going to go home and my family should throw out a red carpet and there should be a parade for me and because I'm doing all this work. And your family did not get the 30, 60, 90 days of treatment. They're at home trying to hold everything down with a laundry list of things that hurt them. And you're going to come out and hit this wall of, wait, why are you not happy that I've done all this stuff? And they're like, oh, we're just beginning.
And that vulnerability is tough.
And that vulnerability is very tough. It's humility.
Yeah.
There's that paradox that I think most of us sort of grow up in this world of like either or. Things have to either be this way or they have to be that way. And as either with maturity, maybe those normal people go through that. I don't know who they are. I'm not one of them. Through this work that we do, what we recognize, particularly in recovery, I think it introduces the idea very early on that there's a lot of paradox. There's a lot of both and. There's a lot of, I am an addict. If I feed this thing in me, I will implode my life without a doubt. And I'm not using today, and that means I have a better chance at being a better version of me than I ever had the opportunity before. It's not one or the other. I have to walk with my addict right next to me. I'm not shoving them in a closet. I have to have them right next to me. I have to be able to go, yeah, I am capable of incredible harm. And I'm working really hard to not feed that, to not be that today.
There's a sense of, as I'm listening, there's a sense of like double life for a sex addict because, like you mentioned earlier, there's a sense of belief system where I am deeply defected. So I'm going to have to hide it and I'm going to appear this way. And that creates that lack of intimacy because you lose a sense of connection within yourself. You
Absolutely.
know?
The world will shun me if I show you who I really am.
Yeah. So that's very deep. But Luke knows this really well about recovery. You know, recovery is about change. But then I also know this from my own home country and political situations. Like real change happens when the system changes. Otherwise, it's just a superficial change. So for an addict, like there is a belief system that is impaired, that is incorrect, that is not. So like only if the belief system changes, you know, things will change. Because growing up with that sense of I am defective, if that's a belief system, like the world is outside of this wall, and then there's a lack of connection.
And I'm gonna usually unconsciously, very unconsciously, set up situations that are gonna confirm that defective. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna say things or do things or repeat situations that will then like, well, see, I'm defective. See, nobody cares about me. And then I'm gonna justify going back to the maladaptive behavior. So the isolation turns into powerlessness. For me, very specifically, I could go back to exactly when as a teenager I felt very powerless and very alone and very resentful, very, very angry about the power that I felt other people had over me, whether it was in the judgments and opinions they had of me or the decisions that were being made for me or about me. And that was when my very oppositional defiant came roaring out of the gate. And that was sex, drugs, rock and roll. That was whatever, whenever, whoever, however, don't care. The rationalization and justification for all sorts of really, really, really self-destructive and destructive to relationships behavior came out for me. And I think there is maybe not a track that clear, but there is generally that track of what I see and what I work with my clients is identifying that sense of isolation and that level of powerlessness. And that came out of asking that question of like, particularly with relapse. It's like, well, when did this relapse happen? And it's like, well, my wife was out of town, or, you know, she was upset with me and I was alone, and I was bored. That word boredom, like number one on the Family Feud leaderboard of what could cause you to relapse? Boredom. What does that actually mean? That was my question. I was like, what is actually happening in that boredom?
What are you thinking? What are you feeling?
What do you, I'm feeling alone. Mm-hmm. I'm feeling alone and I don't know, because really it's like, boredom, like, man, when I have nothing to do, I have 8,000 creative things to think of doing. Like the last thing on the list is, let me go drink or drug or go have sex with a random stranger, or that's not there anymore. Thank goodness. But I got it. When I think about in that early stage and that early recognition of particularly in early recovery, for it happens for substance abuse, but when I'm working with sex addicts too, it's like, I have to really get you on board with feeling really uncomfortable for a while. Like the discomfort won't kill you, and it's so necessary.
And it goes back to that lack of connection. And I often ask people, are you alone? Yes. But is it really lonely?
Right.
And when you're lonely, what comes up for you?
Right.
And that, it's lack of connection, but boy, the emotions and then wanting to cope with feeling lonely or not just comfortable with really not with the uncomfortability, really, right? I mean, I remember feeling that and going home, oh my gosh, I'm alone, but I'm just lonely after a 4-year breakup, living by myself. And then what behaviors can come with that and wanting to.
And what are my choices in that
Yes.
loneliness?
Yeah.
Do I have to stay lonely?
Yeah.
I want to ask about the social skills aspect of this too, because that the relational, because our identities are relational. And since we're talking about like porn, for example, like if somebody finds out porn at an early age, there's, because when you want to go out with somebody, you got to ask somebody out, and there's a sense of rejection,
Huge risk.
But like when you get pleasure from porn, there's no sense of rejection. You can just get it whenever you want it. But then the more you do that, the more you're dissociating from the society. So like having those, and then it develops low self-esteem, and then the lower your self-esteem goes, the harder to make connection with other people, So like, how do you help a sex addict to have that relational identity again, to be out in the world? Because, boredom wouldn't happen if you have a good sense of belonging. Like, oh yeah, I'm going to call someone because I'm bored.
Yeah.
But other than that,
but
like,
if I have no one to call because I've isolated myself so much, that and that's part of the kicker too, is like my partner who I love, and I think that's true. I mean, for most people, it's like I love my wife and my kids. I really, but your partner's not feeling that right now. They're feeling really betrayed, and they're as isolated as you are. Like you've broken any attempt at that relational bond, and so now you've done the thing that was the worst case scenario for you. None of us wants to be lonely and isolated and without love and connection. But through my behavior and then the getting caught in the behavior, I've really done the biggest, worst. Like I've really cut myself off from you. And now I'm really in that spiral. And so again, it's coming into that, like, it's going to be uncomfortable, but we're going to have to deconstruct this from that belief of I'm not good enough, and so I have to mask myself as this other person into this is who I am, and in this space right now as I am, you are rejecting me.
Yeah.
That's a truth.
Cause, effect, the action.
And I have to accept that. I have to I did that. It's a lot of the both and. It's like, in order to get better, we have to start with, it's the dialectic behavioral therapy, the two truths are here. And I have to sit with that, and I have to get a little more comfortable with that idea, because that's the one moving forward. I've seen it in substance use, and I've seen it in sex addiction, where there's oftentimes this initial, the partner says, well, this is what I need from you. In order to stay in this marriage or this relationship, this is what I need for you to do. And it's often like you need to go to meetings, and you need to work with a therapist, and you need to be doing this work. What does that mean? Like I was 3 years into my recovery before I hit that emotional bottom with my sex and love addiction, and had to this is the work. This is the actual thing that's really gonna change me, that's really gonna move me forward. And it was a very spiritual awakening. It was up until that point, it was like I'd hear people talk about it. I was like, yeah, I haven't had that. That's not happening for me. It was performance based. I did my recovery in a performance based format for a solid couple of years. I did all the things, but I did it so I was checking boxes, so I could sit in a meeting and I could hear the topic and I could go, oh yeah, this is what I know about that.
It's not uncommon for people to come to Recovery Collective I'm sure you see it too, people with 3, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and then address their sex addiction, their lust, their gambling, their other behaviors.
This other thing that we don't talk about in the AA
Correct.
room.
Correct.
Which is a shame,
yeah,
in my opinion.
Yeah.
Because it's happening, and I've seen it.
And I think it's where we are at in our culture and society now with the gambling and the easy access to the full spectrum of sex and lust that we can visibly see and easily get to. That might have been a lot harder 20 years ago. That I hope it becomes much more parallel as a focus primarily together.
Yeah. So my work has to start with, how did this begin? What's the core system here? It's usually shame-based. It's usually that isolation of. And then working with that shame into that, it's going to be performative because we got to learn the tools. We have to pick up the tools. We have to get comfortable with the tools. We have to start learning to take some risks. Like, who is your support system? What's been your wife? She's really mad at you. She does not want to, you're on your own, buddy. So who else do we have to lean on? And this is where, and this is something I've seen in 12-step recovery in substance use, is I think one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen is to go to an anniversary of a man and have other men talk about him in such a beautiful, loving, caring sort of way. To hear men sit in that realm and go, I love you, and connect in that. It's like, it gives me goosebumps, because that, I think, has been lost for you. You guys have been taught and trained. You get, one or two emotions, and they're usually the angry ones. Who are you if you say, I love you? Who are you? If you show your sensitivity, it's.
You do a round of golf for 4 hours. What do you talk about? I don't know.
Yeah. Stuff way up here. And I'm very lucky that I have a husband who was like, I have no interest in those conversations. Like, I'll be in the kitchen with the women talking about the deep emotional, but he has carried a lot of that shame stuff as well. We sort of worked on it we were not together at the time, but we were kind of working on that stuff in our own little journeys. And it made being able to communicate about that stuff a little bit better. Although what's really interesting in this work in the last several years that I've done, we're now having conversations that are like, wow, this is really interesting. There's a lot of other things in there that impact relationships, right? You get, again, you have that picture of what it's going to look like. You have that picture that you learned on the screen, not just from pornography, but even from our movies, I mean, I always go back to Jerry Maguire and the moment of "You complete me," and I go, "What?" That's a terrible sentence. That is that you fill the void in me, and that is, it's like, what happened after that story is what I'm always curious about, because if that's the reality, we probably ran into some stumbling blocks there.
Yeah, the "you complete me" triggers my codependency. What does
deeply
what would, for the spouses, the family members who are listening to this episode, talk about enabling someone with maladaptive behaviors, with sex and lust and sex addiction? How would you help the family members that might either be struggling or might be enabling these unhealthy behaviors?
Usually what I have to do in the beginning is listen to a lot of stuff about the partner who has abused the trust, right? It's a lot of validation. Like, you're not crazy.
Yeah.
That sentence is not okay. And
yeah,
those are, that is gaslighting.
Any addiction wants to train the spouse so that way the addiction continue. Right? That's the idea. I want you to walk on eggshells so I can continue my unhealthy behaviors.
Well, yeah. Well, because we're very intuitive. We as human beings are very intuitive. We don't trust our intuition. We have our heads full of all sorts of weird stuff that, if I go, this doesn't feel right, And I bring that to you, and you say, what are you talking about? You're being crazy. Woof. I have been called crazy in the past. It is a very awful feeling to be called that. And every single time coming out of, those relationships and looking back, it's like, I wasn't crazy. I was on to something.
So listeners, if that is you, if you like you can't trust your intuition, that wise part of self, that is a wonderful reason to go to therapy.
Yes.
Empower that wise part of self. All right,
Yes.
Continue.
Yes, because that is where so much of the damage is done. So the partner has not only, been betrayed in this discovery, and discovery is a whole other thing we could talk about, because it's typically happens in a death by 1,000 cuts sort of scenario, where there's much like the addict. It's like, well, I caught him drinking, and it's, well, how much are you drinking? I'm having a couple of beers every night. It's like, well, let's multiply that by 10.
Yeah. That's the safe bet. Yeah.
And then add in a few other things, because we're going to find out about those later.
Just a couple.
And so, there is I saw a text on my husband's phone, and it always starts with, I had a feeling. I've never had this feeling before.
Intuition.
But I had a feeling. And so for some reason, I went to look at my husband's phone. Now the husband will say, had him say it, well, isn't that a violation of my boundaries and my trust that she's looking at my phone? I'm like, did you have something on your phone that was secret and you didn't want to be seen? Because really, I should be able to hand you my phone and go, hey,
Sure.
Look away. I have nothing to hide.
That can be true. However, the justification, yeah.
And there
The
is
vulnerability.
If I'm looking for something, why am I looking for something? Mm-hmm. I'm probably going to find something.
Yeah.
And they do, but what they find may be pretty, I was going to say benign, but that's not the right word.
Early warning sign, or...
It may be a massage parlor, or maybe, and there's a story around why and what, and it was really nothing. That's another one of those gaslighting, it was nothing. Or it was because of you. It was because we had that fight, or you were paying attention to the kids, and that's just another cut. And then that's
a slash, but go ahead.
Then there's what Michelle Mays calls Sherlocking, right? So I, as the betrayed partner, then go into like, well, what else is there? Because now there's a tiny little rip in the fabric of my reality. And now all sorts of questions are coming out. And now, man, we are a woman whose intuition is now like, the radar has gone up. We are the greatest investigative.
Yes. Yeah. The hunting and gathering.
So we go into Sherlocking mode, and we start, and then the questions start, and then we come back with more questions. And at that point, like, the light is now on the addict, and they're like, oh man, I'm caught. And if they have a level of like, this is bad, and I want to reconnect with my partner, so I want to give them what they're asking me for. It's a really, really tricky place, because you're asking me for the truth. I'm going to keep giving you the truth. It's going to keep punching you in the face. And I'm asking to be punched in the face. It's a really awful, and that's usually when we get people. So I'm validating what's happening for the partner, and at the same time I'm going, you might want to stop asking those questions right now, just for the time being. What we do in our practice is we do something called a disclosure if the partner wants it. If the betrayed partner wants, like, I want all the information. I want to know how bad this is, how far back it goes, how deep this wound is.
And you put it in black and white paper, huh?
We want it. Yeah. It's a 4-step inventory like no other.
Yeah.
But it also goes all the way back. I I take my addicts all the way, like, when did this actually start for you as a behavior to release that tension? Because one of the things I have to teach my partners is that in most cases with sex addiction, what started never had your name on it.
It starts at hello, right? It starts at clicking on that website, or I'll look on that Facebook.
And that wasn't ever about a partner. That
Yeah.
was about your addict finding a way out of distress.
Yeah. And the addict certainly removes denial. That disclosure process. Transparency, it's vulnerability. It's
But how long did it take you to come out of denial?
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
How long did it take you, Zah, to come out of denial? I mean, I walked in with, well, this might be bad,
Yeah.
but not all this other.
It's layers, right?
It's layers. It's peeling back layers to get to truth, right? So there's that, there's that both end of like, I want to be truthful with you. I don't even know what that means for me.
Yeah, you might think you're being truthful, then you get to a whole nother level of trust and honesty with the disclosure, with the support of everyone involved with it.
I was so
treatment.
masked. I was so, and I was really young. I didn't even have an identity when I got sober. I was 19 years old. I was an amoeba.
I was saying I was honest, but I didn't realize how full of shit I was. But I was as honest as I could be at the time.
And
But I
that's
was
a
full
lot of
shit.
where I start with people is like, you have to start with, I'm a liar.
Yeah.
I'm absolutely a liar.
And I didn't think I was.
First and foremost, I'll tell you what I think is true, what I think you might want to be true.
Yeah.
I don't know what truth is. I used to sit in meetings all the time, and when they were like, the topic is honesty, I'd go, oh, man. It's like, I got nothing.
So funny.
Everything out of my mouth felt like, is that really true, Ann? Is that?
Yep.
I don't even know. I don't know was the most honest answer I could give, and nobody wants that answer.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody wants, I don't know.
Yeah.
But to me, that is the greatest thing that we can wrestle with and come to, dealing with the I don't know, swimming in the uncertainty of it is not clear right now. So for me to try to tell you something that feels honest would be dishonest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, so I'm thinking just Buddhist principles. I'm thinking about cravings and letting go of suffering and upset. Like, what's on your mind when it comes to your perspective?
I mean, sex is not talked about that much in Buddhism, but
Well, they try to avoid it with.
but it falls under the category of cravings. As I'm listening to this conversation again, like life is supposed to be enjoyable. Life is supposed to be. We're supposed to be happy. I don't know if pleasure is the right word, but
Define that though.
like finding joy, finding meaning and purpose in life. But like for a sex addict, if the pleasure is getting out of only in this behavior, then also, especially in an addiction, it's insatiable. Like you want this, you get this, and you want more. There's seeking of the novelty over and over again. But the real pleasure, real joy in life doesn't create more suffering.
Right.
I love connecting with my children, and that's it. That's meaningful. I love what I do. That's meaningful. Life is supposed to be enjoyable that way, with having a sense of being at ease with who you are, and then finding joy in that. And then sex is one of the many things that you're supposed to enjoy. When you're approaching life that way, sex is placed in a proper place. I know there are some people who practice celibacy as well, sex completely out of their life, and they find peace. But I think that really is like the key component of recovery in this, to find your true identity, being at ease with who you are.
Absolutely. And I asked the sort of definition of happiness because that is one of those places that I go to with people. Because for me, one of the discoveries was my assumption of happiness was euphoria, which feels different to me than joy. Mm-hmm. And so that was long into my recovery, like, oh, I am still seeking that euphoric.
Euphoric is almost like an escape to me. When you said that, it was like, that's like the way. If you could see our faces, like, oh yeah, I know what that's like. I just dreamed.
The hit, the big hit. And I had to do this like, oh, I feel like joy is it involves that contentment. It involves that connection to self and presence, and it's sustainable. Like I can work towards that. Like I could wake up every day and decide I'm going to be in a place of that versus I am seeking this hit.
To me, that's the difference between an earned high, joy, and an unearned high, euphoria.
Yeah.
You're working for that unearned high. You got to hide it and you're doing actions, but one is a different kind of connection.
Yeah. And the true joy, that presence, that piece of it doesn't cause harm. It has its own boundaries, and it has its own, I can say this feels good, this doesn't feel good. Like I know what the parameters are of that. Yeah. This euphoria thing is like an insatiable monster that it's never going to be satisfied. We have a mutual friend, and she will say in her workshops that I've done with her, she will say that I taught her, like she came bouncing into work one day talking about another date that she'd gone on and, asking my advice. And I said, well, do you really want a relationship or do you want to hit? And she looked like I slapped her in the face.
It's like, fuck.
And it just sort of organically came out of me. Like, I've been hearing about these dates and these experiences, and they sound like hits to me. They sound like really intense experiences, but they don't sound sustainable, and there is that realization that going into relationship, Anna Lemke is a goddess. I love her. She wrote a book called Dopamine Nation. And I listened to her in an interview on Armchair Expert. And she talks not just about substance abuse, but she talks about sex addiction. She talks about all sorts of mental health things that have to do with our dopaminergic system. And how that really, when we get hooked in that, how that really then starts to inform our thinking, our beliefs, and our behavior. So much of, there's this idea that, I think from one place. And I think, and then I make it happen. And we are so driven by our unconscious parts of our brain, much more than we ever really realize. So another aspect of what I try to work with in my clients is like, we have to bring that unconscious stuff to the surface.
Bingo. I think that's one of the messages. We have to understand
the multidimensional parts of us and how it's not just our minds, but our bodies. When we move into our bodies and we start to listen to that intuition, it has informed me more and moved me away from more negative situations in my crone years as I am in, and in really, really profound ways. Like my brain was going, we do not understand what this situation is. We do not have the information. No one is giving us the information, but the system is going offline. And that is telling us there is a huge unsafe thing happening here. And I move away from it, and it doesn't happen right away a lot of times, but within weeks, all of a sudden the rest of the information is revealed. It's like, oh, I did dodge a bullet. I didn't know I was doing that, and I didn't understand why. Now, my head also has in there, you're being crazy. You're being dramatic, Ann. You're being, you're making things up. And I will. My brain will fill in,
We're good at that.
In the I don't know space that my brain doesn't like, it'll go, let's make up a story. Let's make up we can get some good stories going. I see this a lot of times with my clients. They'll do that, they'll future trip as somebody we worked with in the past. It'll go into some really catastrophic, amazing. I had a client once who had to leave treatment because he was completely convinced that his wife and child had been in a car accident, and that's why they hadn't shown up at the facility. No evidence.
Yeah.
The wife was actually just taking her time because he was in treatment and she was kind of mad. I was like, no, I'm not running up there 20 minutes from now to give you what you want.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not rushing for your cigarettes.
Complete story. And that's what betrayed partners go through too, right? So there's the aftermath of, well, now my partner's gone to treatment and they're coming out and they're saying they're in recovery. They say they're going to meetings. They say but I don't see anything changing. And that's a really tough space to work with people.
Yeah.
Because they're then putting them in my hands and going, change my partner. And it's not happening fast enough. And I've had several just recently where it's like, so how long have we been in it? 9 months. I'm like, oh, okay. Not even at a year, but we're really pressing to have some big dramatic changes happen.
What support groups or recovery recommendations would you recommend for the betrayed loved ones?
There are, connected with every, SA, SAA, even, AA and all of those, there is some sort of family support group. Mm-hmm. And I would say definitely from an informative place, those groups are really good. Can be tricky in the betrayed realm because partners will go and they'll get triggered by if other people are talking about their partners not getting better, or they're not, it can feel like they can come back from that with like, oh, this is going to just never end.
Things, yeah.
There are some really good, and again, I would say Michelle Mays is in Virginia. Has written a fantastic book called The Betrayal Bind, in which she talks about there's an injury cycle that happens for the partner that is really, really hard to come out of. And she writes beautifully about it. She offers intensives for partners.
Smart.
She has a whole, I hope it starts up very soon, training for helping partners kind of come out of that betrayal bind cycle.
Yeah, that's good.
There are treatments. Most of the treatment centers, like the Meadows is the big treatment center for this type of work. Patrick Carnes, many years ago, he did his PhD and sort of started this whole facing the shadows and the work that we are trained in the CSAT world.
And Meadows is in residential inpatient? Or
residential inpatient, has all levels of care, but they do, within that realm, they have it sort of divided up into all sorts of very specific pieces for people to get really, really direct care. There are programs that they are connected with. PEP is one of them. It's for professionals. If there is additional mental health issues that need to be addressed. So there are more places than ever. In our particular area, though, on the East Coast here, it's really wanting. Harbor of Grace does have somebody who does some of this work. But there are also, across the board online, so many groups in intensive. There's Bloom for Women, which is Dr. Kevin Skinner, who is one of those people in the CSAT world who's very well known. Alex Katahakis out in on the West Coast has Center for Healthy Sex. And groups for men, groups for women, intensives, same thing. And she is very much in the realm of she teaches CSAT modules, but she also is in the sex therapy realm. So that has when you were talking about that earlier, Zaw, my understanding from people who've done CSAT work got trained in the past, there was this sort of, well, now we get the addict healthy again, but we're not really teaching them how to have healthy sex. So we're sort of not really taking it to the next level. And that has expanded now much more so. That it's not just about, we're going to stop here and then good luck. We actually want to readdress those core beliefs. We want to knock the shame out of, we really want to knock the shame out of sex. Yeah. I would like to altogether, why are we making this such a thing? Yeah. And then helping couples to do that repair work. So we have our disclosure process. It is this sort of accounting of everything. And then we go into kind of the repair process, which involves like the partner being able to write an impact letter, the addict being able to come back and, what we're building is this, I'm listening to you. I'm taking ownership of the impact I had on you. And we're starting here to rebuild our communication and our connection. And it has to be a buy-in to we're leaving that marriage behind or that relationship behind, and we're moving into something very different. And again, we all know what that looks like, so that can feel really scary. And at that point, sometimes people will go, nope, I'm out.
It's the continuum of care. We need that with substance use recovery when someone is back home and they're not using and they're 5 minutes late from work, and then the spouse or loved one is, oh, do I say something? I'm scared. I want to talk. I don't know how. And how do you process that? Well, same thing with sex. Okay. People are going to be very triggered.
Yeah.
Whether it's during or the whole spectrum that comes with
it
the
can
recovery
be as
journey.
Simple as, because so much pornography now is being watched on the phone.
Yeah.
So if my husband is late for work, if I look out the window and I see him in his car and he's on his phone, I don't know what he's doing. And in fact, Lance, like the minute my husband pulls out his phone, I get triggered.
Yeah. I mean, that's part of the continuum of recovery for both members. Zoe, can you touch upon, for the listeners that don't know, what SA or SAA is, and then you can potentially piggyback off of it?
I think there's at least 5 or 7 S fellowships, like Sex Addicts Anonymous, SRA, SLAA, SA, Sexaholics Anonymous, SPA, Sex and Porn Addicts Anonymous, and then PA, Porn Addicts. I mean, there are just so many but
branches of the tree.
Yeah. But they're all 12-step base, I think, and there's also COSA. Maybe it has to do with partners of sex addicts, and then Sex-Anon, which is like some kind of an Al-Anon version of Sex Addicts Anonymous. But yeah, I don't know the differences between all of them, but I know there's a sense of community, and I think that's really is a key for any kind of addicts to reconnect with a sense of community, and then finding your true self in that, So that's as much as I know. But I also wanted to kind of, maybe we've already talked about it, that emotional aspect of sex addiction, because when somebody is using these behaviors, there is emotional availability being taken away. And the betrayal does happen in that you're with your partner, but then there is no emotional connection, emotional availability. But then reclaiming that can be part of this recovery journey too. Yeah. That you can just sense it when you're with somebody, and when that person is truly present, you can feel it. Especially it's more important in an intimate relationship.
Well, there's a piece of that too that we haven't talked about, which is a big part of this as well, which is understanding attachment. On both sides. So there's a lot of attachment disruption that can happen that lands people in one of several categories, which is the securely attached person who doesn't really have that anxiety about what their partner's doing or what's happening with them.
They're safe, they're seen, they're soothed appropriately.
There's the dismissive avoidant who kind of does the come here, go away thing. They want connection, they want attachment, but they don't really know how to let it in. So as soon as it starts to feel a little comfortable, they'll push that away.
Or close up.
Yeah, they are definitely the like, I don't feel like you make time for me. I don't feel like you're really present when you're here. I don't, and they want to be, but they don't know how to do that. Usually happens very early on. And then there's the anxious avoidant, which is really a come here, go away. And that is the sort of that, what is that, object permanence kind of thing. Like when you're here, even when you're here, I still don't feel secure and safe. So I'm asking you all, like, are we okay? Are we okay? Are you mad at me? Is everything okay?
Do you love
sure?
me? You
sure?
Do you really love me?
Do you really love me? Which can, and the funny thing is the anxious avoidant and the dismissive avoidant tend to be attracted to each other a lot. So when that comes at the dismissive, they feel very pressured, and it pushes them even farther away. And so then there's this sort of weird dance that happens. And then there's the really fun one that I identified myself as, which is the disorganized, which is a sort of, you move in and out of feeling anxious about your attachments and feeling just sort of dismissive and avoidant. It's like binge purge kind of, I love people, I'm going all in, and then people suck, and I don't want to have anything to do with them.
And all can be roller coasters.
And all can be roller coasters. But understanding, there's controversy there in terms of like, well, you can't really change your attachment, personality, whatever. I don't believe that that's true at all. I believe that one of the things about recovery is that, you can come in as a very insecure, anxious person, and doing this work, really sort of understanding your internal self, finding community, finding some sense of connection spiritually, emotionally, is a mental health mandate. We need it. Whatever that belief is, we need it. We need to find a way to connect with it. And that creates a healthy, solid human being. I still don't know who I am as an individual, but I am solid in myself. Like there's no void, there's no sense of dis-ease. I'm a constantly changing individual navigating this really fascinating world that we're living in and looking for opportunities to be curious and be open to whatever the universe provides, with a lot of faith that, one of my favorite sayings is everything works out in the end. If it hasn't worked out, it isn't the end.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, until I'm gone, it's not the end.
2 more questions for you. As a therapist, certified with addiction and things like that, if and when is it important to have total abstinence with sex and masturbation? Well,
there's what I think should happen, and then there's what my client is capable of doing.
Makes sense.
Right?
Yes.
So we've all heard the AA mandate, which really made me mad in early recovery, of like, don't get in a relationship for the first year. Nobody ever told me why.
Yeah.
Like, why is that a good idea? What are you supposed to be doing in that year that you're not in relationships? And then there would be all that fuzzy information, but you can have as much sex as you want, which was like, what? Wait, what? That doesn't really make any sense. Now I'm really confused until I heard a tape from Sandy Beach, easy to remember, that really talked about, like, sort of to your point earlier about the connection and the relationship. Like we need to relate to people. We need to learn how to relate to people in a new and different way. So what I learned in my own story, because I didn't stay out of a relationship in the first year, unless you tell me why, it's not my oppositional defiant was going to do what she was going to do. And there were things I had to learn about that. I was very lucky that I got involved with somebody he had the gift of desperation. And so I rode his coattails, and he was my higher power. And that lasted about a year and some change. And out of that came a defining moment for me where, for the first time in my life, I chose myself over the relationship.
Or escapism.
I chose to walk away. I had always been the victim. I painted a beautiful victim picture for myself, and my attachment put me with those avoidant people who were never going to be emotionally available. And until I hit that emotional bottom and had that moment of like, you're the constant, Ann. It's not those people. Somewhere in you is picking them, is picking the same person to play out this role where they're leaving you and you're the left behind victim and oh, woe is me. And I sat down and I fourth and fifth stepped that. And then I saw within that, even when a nice person came into your life, you couldn't receive them because you needed to be the victim. Yeah. So I would become a raving asshole and push them away. But it always had to be them leaving. Never me making the choice that like, hey, you know what? This really isn't working out. I'm not feeling it. Good luck. Let's just part ways, be friends. It always had to be a drama. It always had to be me garnering sympathy. It had to be, to the most dramatic, which was the last relationship I had, that, I really, and I was sober. I came out of that going, I'm insane and sober. I stalked this person.
Obsessions can come in different forms.
Obsessive, awful, but for and all of that in conjunction with, for the first time in my life, being in my early 20s, being responsible, having my own apartment, having adulting for the first time, and not really seeing that or giving myself any credit for that because I was so obsessed with being a victim in this story, in this cycle. And the story would have continued had I not come to this place. And I did a lot of conversations in prayer going, this is what I want to happen. I want them to walk away from me. And getting back, that's not going to happen, Ann. It's time for you to decide who you want to be. Who do you want to be? And I chose me and I walked away and I did my own 12-step program focused on relationships, and I saw the pattern. I saw my pattern really, really clearly. And so I did abstain for a while. I didn't do a year. I don't know that like specific deadlines really mean anything. What's more important to me was like, what was I doing?
The work, yeah.
What was I looking at? What was I trying to do in that before I embark on something different? Yeah. And I've had some of those conversations recently with clients because they're doing that and they're like, yeah, so I went on this date and I just like didn't feel like there was much of a spark. And I'm like, yeah, the boring ones are the healthy ones.
And that's something.
They're nice and they say nice things and they're not bringing chaos.
Life will provide chaos. Life will provide life to us. We don't have to add to it.
They're not bringing the chaos, but my brain equated chaos with connection.
And a
big
hit.
Feelings, big hits, big euphoria. Yeah. This must be love.
Yeah. Highs are high, lows are low.
I really appreciate the conversation, and as we began to the healthy sexuality, or like sexuality being part of who we are sexual being. So anybody who's out there, I guess this is what we do too at Recovery Collective, or just recovery in general, is to find your authentic self and then letting that express in multiple ways, as an employee, as a father, as a musician, creative outlet. We didn't talk about that too, but like I think about sex as like a creative energy. It can create babies,
Mm-hmm.
So you need to work with it, because I've seen people who become more creative or finding outlet in creativity, connecting with others, social events, finding joy in life, and then going from there. That's my key takeaways from this conversation.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And what's your take-home message you want the listeners to leave with today?
I think that we all fundamentally deserve to be loved and to feel like we're worthy of love. That journey, as you just described it, it's a creative one. That creativity requires risk, but I believe it's a risk worth taking. And I think, when you step into that place and you take that chance, the what do they say? The universe will conspire to give you everything that you want. Being careful about what you want and understanding that to know who I am, to feel that connection with myself, to understand all those dialectics, all those paradoxes, all those both ands, is what allows me to be connected with you, to understand you, to ask meaningful questions and have a meaningful interaction and relationship. And I just think that makes people and life and the world way more interesting than all this destructiveness turned inwards or outwards or in any direction.
That's good. Well, as we wrap up today's insightful episode, we want to extend our deepest gratitude to Ann for sharing her expertise and invaluable perspectives on such a complex and important topic. Remember, understanding addiction, whether it involves substances or behaviors like sex, is crucial for fostering empathy for self and others and finding effective paths to recovery. If you found value in this conversation, please consider subscribing to our podcast. Writing a review on platforms like Apple certainly helps. And don't forget, Season 2 of the podcast will end in July, and we'll take a break in August before starting Season 3 in September. During the break, we'll be working on some exciting e-courses that we know our listeners will certainly find beneficial. So stay tuned. Thank you for joining us on this recovery. Remember, understanding and addressing addiction is a collective effort. Share this episode with others who might benefit from it, and let's continue to build a compassionate, informed community together. Take care and be well. My name is Luke.
And this is all. Thank you all for listening, and thank you, Ann, for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
See you next time.